Tao, to discuss the afterlife of the individual in Buddhism, one must begin with reincarnation. Reincarnation is a property of religions that emerged from the Indian subcontinent. It's in Hinduism and Buddhism. How does it work in Buddhism, reincarnation, as it began, and then as it developed, as it has different schools, it came to China? Are there any gradations of the reincarnation as the history developed?
So Buddhism and Hinduism and Jainism, they all embrace the idea of reincarnation, and which basically postulate that there's the sort of multiplicity of, there's multiple lives, and then there's something that connects all of these lives together through karma until for Buddhism, until one achieves nirvana or awakening. So for any particular individual person, it goes through very many cycles of reincarnation until finally, after all of these sort of meditation, cultivation, different kinds of practices, that's in
each life.
Yeah, in each life. That's however many life that it takes to go through this, and your craving, your attachment, and these burning fire of desire that blows out, and that's how peace would finally arrive. That's how the nirvana would be achieved.
And this nirvana is a conscious nirvana. It's not an extinguishing. I mean, you can have peace by being extinguished, because then you have no suffering.
Yeah.
But that's not the kind of nirvana.
Right. It's supposed to be. Sometimes it's understood to be. The comparison is made to something like a state when there's no longer any sort of internal tension. There's no longer kind of duality. There's no longer sort of self-other distinction. There's no other kinds of problem that arises in the very structure of consciousness. And all of our problems, all of our sufferings, when it really comes down to it, according to Buddhism, is these different kinds of dualistic structure of the mind, of consciousness. And if that somehow is overcome, then the nirvana will be accomplished.
And this is equally applies to everyone. You don't have to be a Buddhist. I mean, this process applies to everyone who lives, either whether they know it or not. It's going to happen.
Right. Whether you're a Buddhist or not, that's not important.
Not important. Not even important.
No.
And
you don't have to have the faith in the Buddha too.
Right.
I mean, of course, if you trust the Buddha's teaching, then that's right. Then you have
it'll accelerate the process, maybe.
Right.
But no matter what, the same karma is going to work on you and works on everyone else.
Yeah, just like gravity. Whether you believe it or not, it's
gravity. It's like gravity.
It's like gravity.
It's a process that is automatically have a correspondence with what you do with what happens.
Right.
Now, will everybody eventually reach nirvana? I mean, this is a kind of a question that has a framework of a Abrahamic framework of, are you going to be saved or not saved, or you're going to make it or not make it. So that's the framework. That may be the wrong framework to talk about it, but you want to ask: is everybody going to? Everybody has to be involved in the process. You don't make a choice; you are involved. So, will some people go on forever and never get there, or will everybody eventually get there, or how many everybody's are there? All these questions.
All of these are very tricky. They'll all be debated. I think in Mahāyāna Buddhism, which developed later it's about 500 years after the death of the historical Buddha, on the beginning of the Common Era, that it developed the idea of the Bodhisattva, that the concept of Mahāyāna is the greater vehicle, which means that according to the Bodhisattva vow, everybody will be delivered from the shore of suffering to the shore of the end of suffering or enlightenment. So there is this sort of the sense of the collective, that unless everybody is enlightened, unless everybody is saved, nobody is.
Okay.
Right? So that's a very distinct sort of collective idea. Whereas in early Buddhist teachings, it seems to be much more sort of individualistic in that kind of effort. So the idea that you, through your own practice, through multiple lifetimes, then you will achieve enlightenment.
Tao, in ancient Chinese philosophy, there is nothing like reincarnation, which came in later through Buddhism. But what happens after death? What happens to the individual?
The Chinese do not seem to be particularly bothered by that question. In some ways, it was the Buddhists who introduced that anxiety to Chinese. That the Chinese did not seem to be particularly worried what's going to happen. Of course, the idea is that one of the ideas is that become ancestors and you enjoy these sort of ancestral rituals if you have offspring. But when the Buddhists enter into China,
let's start with the ancestor.
Right.
So if that's something that I'm looking forward to, we all don't look forward to dying, but if we do die, you become an ancestor. You look forward to the worship or the appreciation of your progeny. Is that something that I'm aware of? Do I have a post-mortem awareness and therefore feel pleasure to see my future generations venerating me?
That's debated. Some people do not think so. Some people do, right? And what's important from the Chinese perspective is that regardless of whether there is awareness of the ancestral spirits, what's important is the practice of worship itself. Is the practice of ancestral worship that you perform these kind of rituals, and that through these kind of ritual, you regulate the family, you regulate society, and that's what's really important. Whether the ancestral spirit is aware of or not is something that's not really at the center of the debate.
Yeah, and that's a fascinating insight into the distinction between Chinese philosophy of religion and Western philosophy of religion, or Abrahamic philosophy of religion more accurately, because it seems exactly the reverse. Where this world is irrelevant and those philosophies are not irrelevant, but is very much secondary, and the primary point is preparing yourself for the reward or the heaven or avoid the hell and the future life. That's the important thing, and everything in this world is to serve the future world. Here you were saying in Chinese philosophy exactly the opposite. We're not sure of the future world, we're not even sure whether it exists, but the idea of its existence is the main point in order to benefit the current world.
That's very true, yeah. That's very on point, yes. I think that's exactly right.
I mean, that's like 180 degrees opposite.
That's very, the focus seems to be very different.
Yeah,
focus very different. This is what motivates him.
Yeah, motivation.
Seems to be very different. And the danger of focusing too much on the other world is sometimes it leads to the denigration of this world, and that can be problematic.
Yeah, and that's a legitimate criticism of Abrahamic religions, that they don't care about this world in terms of what's happening, because it's all the future.
At least that's possible. Yeah, so that's a possible.
It's possible,
scenario.
sure.
Yeah,
and that in Chinese philosophy, this world is the most important thing at the different levels: the family, the society, politics.
This is the world that we know.
Yeah.
This is the world that we can make any claims about. Others, it's good to keep them in mind. It's good to as a way of possibilities, but that shouldn't be the preoccupation. I think that's from Confucius. Yeah.
And as then Chinese philosophy developed more complexly with Taoism, and then Buddhism coming in and Buddhism changing in Chinese environment, does that mix change at all in terms of personal orientations?
Right. So Buddhism, in many ways, they introduce a particular kinds of anxiety. So all of a sudden now because whereas Chinese didn't have to worry about the status of the ancestral spirit, now all of a sudden you have to worry about it, right? And also, if you buy the reincarnation, transmigration, what happens afterwards? And so then all of a sudden those become real issues which they didn't bother them before. So now the Buddhists say, oh, here's the solution. So they introduce new sets of problems, then provides a new sets of solutions, right? That's what's really interesting development in the Chinese spiritual realm.